Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this presentation on the Antarctic. It's a very special evening to me because it brings back lots of wonderful memories and experiences of a lot of things I saw and did and shared with. But importantly, this is an expedition, not a journey. We achieved a lot of things on this way, and we went south in the ship a long way. It's a long, long way down to the Antarctic. Why did I do this? Well, my interest in the Antarctic has been lifelong, and as we progress through this presentation, you'll see what this lifelong interest has all stemmed from. The photographs tonight have mainly come from two sources. Over the expedition, photographs taken by anybody on board of interest were collected, and at the expedition this is put together on a CD, and there are over 350 photos taken from various staff members, expedition members and passengers. Tonight we're only going to show you a small selection of those. Some of those photographs are mine because I took them to sort of show of a specific interest that related to this expedition. The expedition departed from Bluff. The ship was the Professor Kromov. It was a Russian ship, then renamed the Spirit of Enderby by the expedition company. The company was Heritage Expeditions, and it was based in Christchurch. Now, the ship was Russian, originally built as an oceanographic research vessel, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, this ship and several others of its sister ships were converted into expedition sailing. For Antarctic or Arctic work, this ship is absolutely perfect. It is ice strengthened, and it can sail through a reasonable thickness of ice as long as the ice is broken. It's not an icebreaker, and you'll see some of the ice we went through later on. For the technical minded, the ship was 72 metres long and it cruised at 13 knots. Well, it's not fast, but when you think about it, it's fast enough, and I'll explain why. Generally on this expedition from Bluff, we sail south, and on our return, we sail north. When you think about it, the roaring 40s, the screaming 50s, and the shrieking 60s all come from one direction, and that's side on. So you can't have a ship that's going to be sailing fast because the sea conditions will not allow it. And overnight from Bluff, we sailed south, and we woke up in the morning, we were off the Snares Island. This is a group of islands lying 200 kilometres south of Bluff. It was first sighted by Europeans in 1791, and it was named by a chap called Vancouver, who called it the Snares because he considered them a shipping hazard. Sunrise at the Snares. These islands are totally protected and no landing is permitted. However, we could cruise along the shore. The Snares tend to be lower and flatter at the northern end, and then rise steeply as they progress south, where the cliffs drop sheer into the ocean. The main island itself has literally tens of thousands of sooty shearwaters. At night, they literally crash land through the vegetation and drop to the forest floor, where they go to their burrows to feed their young. We were there at daybreak, and they just take off from the bush and landed in the sea around the ship. At some apparently pre-arranged time, they just took off, and as they banked across the rising sun, they literally blocked it out. It was just a black band as they went in front of the sun. So to get cruising, And believe it or not, right up that gully, there was a penguin nesting. So what they were doing, how the penguin got up there remains to be seen. It'd be a scramble for any person to get up there, let alone a penguin with no hands. An albatross nesting, I'm not sure which breed of albatross, there are a great many. By looking at the head, it's probably a shy-capped albatross. Cruised round the shore of the Snares Islands in the Zodiacs with about 8 to 9 people or passengers manned by one of the expedition staff. Once we left Bluff, the only way ashore was by Zodiac. There were no jetties or wharves to use, so we used these Zodiacs. All Kelp is fantastic to watch it move in the current. It just looked as if somebody had a comb and was combing it as it sort of moved with the water motion.
Yeah.
New Zealand fur seal. And they're actually quite inquisitive, and they'll come up quite close to have a look and see what you're doing. Then it's sort of a bit of a devilment. They'll give them a bit of a splash to say, "Oh, I've got you sods," and they'll spray us all with water.
And I'll just pause you there for a moment. Welcome to the call, Greg and Roberta, and also Gordon. Gordon, can I just ask you to put yourself on mute?
Okay.
Thank you. It's just in the bottom left of your screen there. Thanks very much. Carry on, Robin.
Thank you. Penguin is a Snares crested. It's endemic to the Snares Island. There are now found nowhere else. They've established more than 100 colonies on the larger of the islands and one of the other smaller islands of the Snares, Broughton Island. Mollymawk, you can see in the background there, we're reboarding the ship. And I can read Russian, that says Professor Kromov, Vladivostok. One thing that was stressed upon us right from the start is hygiene. And when we left the ship, we had to always wash our footwear and everything we were taking ashore to make sure it was thoroughly clean. All the Velcro, all our packs had to be thoroughly checked for no seeds or foreign matter which could contaminate and then create an infestation of particularly plants on these rather pristine islands. We also had to dip our feet in a solution which sort of acts as a sterilizer to make sure that we weren't taking anything on or off the ship. Overnight from the Snares, we sailed south to the Auckland Islands. And they are 465 kilometres south of New Zealand. And these are the largest of New Zealand's subantarctic islands and made up of 3 islands. At the moment, we're on Enderby Island. That is the most northernest of the Auckland Island group. The main Auckland Island, which is the largest of the 3, is just slightly to the south. It has predators, pigs, cats and mice. And if you may remember watching the news the end of last year, our Department of Conservation is considering doing an extensive poisoning to remove those. And right to the south, there is Adams Island, and that is totally predator-free, as is Enderby Island, but no landing is permitted on Adams Island. And these islands are actually made up of 2 large volcanoes. It's rather a sort of coolish sort of damp day as we headed off from the ship to walk around the island. Yellow-eyed penguin. They certainly weren't too afraid of us anyway. They're certainly quite happy to stand there and look at us as we walk past. At Enderby Island, there's what they call a finger post. Now, over all of the subantarctic islands, you'll find the remnants of these finger posts, and what they're actually doing is pointing to where a castaway hutters or store provisions are, because there are a lot of ships that were lost at these islands. They came in roaring from the west in the westerly winds, and under sail they just smashed themselves to pieces on the rough island. And now at Enderby Island there is a restored castaway provision depot. So the New Zealand government put those in after a lot of complaints by the seafaring people that if they got landed on these islands, they had no food, no anything protection from shelter and that. But at least these finger posts pointed them in the right direction. An Auckland Island teal and an Auckland Island snipe. Very secretive birds. You're just lucky to walk along and you see them appear. The Auckland Islands have the rich flora of the 5 subantarctic islands. The main track across from where we landed across to the other side of the island is boardwalked. And these are the sort of the steep cliffs that are characteristic of the western side of virtually all the subantarctic islands. This is a New Zealand rata. It's a southern rata. It's the same rata as we get in the South Island of New Zealand here, and it's just a bit of a massive red carpet on the floor after all the petals and that drop off the rata bloom. It almost gives a sort of a haunted feeling to this walking through this understory. We sailed south from Enderby Island and into what they call Canley Harbour. Now this is on the main Auckland Island, climbing up to have a look at some albatross colony. And this is why it's so difficult to try and do anything about removing all the predators on Auckland Island, the pigs, the mice and the rats and the cats, because it's too steep, too tall to walk on and not tall enough to get underneath. Here we are up on the top, a bit of Dracophilium and Tussicum there. In the background there is what they call a Victoria Passage, and that's a very strong current that runs through there, and it's not very wide, but the island to the land to the right is Adam Island, and that remains predator free. Because of the strong current, any predators that try to get across there are obviously drowned or swept back to the side. They've never found a predator on Adams Island, and long may that be the case. So we climbed up to see the shy-capped albatross. They weren't concerned at all, though, as long as you just sort of moved quietly, they just sort of sat and looked at you. Now, the only reason these birds are still breeding at this site is that it's too steep for pigs and cats to get at them. And that's why they're nesting on that virtually that sheer face. And all those white dots are nesting shy-capped albatross. We're actually out in the open swell here, and it was quite exhilarating feeling to sort of be going along. These huge swells come through. You sort of felt as if you were going up and down on a very fast lift. From Enderby, we sort of changed slightly direction and went sort of more southwest and headed towards Macquarie Island. Some of the wildlife that we've seen in the sea just happened to be lucky some passenger picked that up. It was quite spectacular to get 2 of those sort of dolphins or porpoises sort of bouncing out of the water at the same time. Now, that's what I call flying. If any of you can fly, you can do that, well, I'll be with you. Macquarie Island, it's an Australian administered island, and we had to go through customs leaving New Zealand because we were going to Macquarie Island. Our passports were taken ashore and actually had Macquarie Island stamped in them to prove that we did actually visit this island. Now this is 1,100 kilometres southwest of Bluff, and it's roughly halfway between New Zealand and the Antarctica. The water is beautifully clear. King penguin, they weren't afraid. They came right round us. Getting in the water, they're actually extremely fast. One of our passengers had a camera that could do film underwater. The king penguin, magnificent birds, extremely unafraid of people. In the background, you'll see some of the vegetation. The year that we were there in 2014, they were just in the process of finalising the complete eradication of rabbits from Macquarie Island. They spent 32 million Australian trying to get rid of the rabbits, and as far as I know, it's been totally successful. This is one of the main king penguin colony at Sandy Bay. These are quite a tall bird. They weigh nearly a metre, sorry, they stand about a metre tall and weigh approximately 15 kilograms. So extremely inquisitive, no fear of coming right up to you. For all wildlife, there was a 5-metre rule to keep away from them all. So if we were walking along the beach, we would have to zigzag away to avoid or to try and ensure we kept this 5-metre rule. A lot of the wildlife, and particularly the king penguin, had not heard of this rule. Perhaps they could not read, or they were blind, or had selective hearing. If you sat down, they would come right up to you and have no sense of fear at all. In fact, one chap was filming and the penguin came up and tapped the lens of his video camera. Your Majesty, absolutely inquisitive. What's this woman doing? Fantastic coloration in there, absolutely beautiful. The other main penguin here is the royal penguin colony. And these are strange because they'll actually wander up to 2 kilometres or more inland and up to over 200 metres in altitude to nest. And this is the home to this particular breed of royal penguin colony. They're quite a lot smaller. They only measure up to about 3/4 of a metre in height and only weigh 5 to 6 kilograms. So they're a lot smaller and a lot lighter than the king. This is the Gentoo. There's a small colony on the other side of the isthmus. As I said, the rabbits have now been totally removed from Macquarie Island, and this has allowed the native vegetation to re-establish. And closer to the Macquarie Island base, they've always kept a pretty good account of any of the rabbits that they saw there. And this is showing some of the effects of having the no rabbit on the island at all. Now, the steel tanks were penguin digesters. When they run out of seals to kill, they decided to try do the penguins, and they built these huge tanks They used to fill them up with penguins and boil the oil out of them. And they'd had some here and some further south in another bay called Lusitania Bay. And this stopped, fortunately, around the turn of the century when it was completely outlawed. The giant petrel. Now these birds are more or less scavengers, and of any wounded penguin or animal, they'll literally just shred it and eat it within a short time. One of the rangers that was with us came with us on Macquarie Island, said they've timed them to eat a gentoo penguin in 20 minutes. That's everything. The feathers, the only things left are the bones. And later they regurgitate the feathers out as a little sort of a round ball. They're quite a big bird. Macquarie Island cabbage grows particularly well on Macquarie Island, hence it's called the Macquarie Island cabbage. And it's got its name from the early whalers and sealers. They ate this plant to ward off scurvy. Now, all parts of the plant are edible, including the large, I suppose you call them rhubarb type leaves, and the stems and that which look like large stalks of celery. Now, this is only one of a lot of the giant megaherps on the subantarctic islands, and they're considered perhaps one of the botanic wonders of the world, because as the climates go further south, the climate gets colder, but some of these herbs have gone the other way and they've become extremely large. And the explorer and botanist, Sir Joseph Hooker, described the flowering of the megaherbs as a second to none outside the tropics. Skuas, not a very attractive bird, and certainly don't have very nice manners. Anything that sort of they can eat, they grab it and they're off with it. The ship offshore at Sandy Bay, there's also a lot of sea elephants there, and they're certainly not very attractive animals anyway, and they've got an odour all of their own. And unfortunately, while they're molting, they're cast on the island until they re-establish their new set outer fur. So they just sit around and until they get their new fur, and as the longer they're there, the grumpier they get. This is one of the rangers telling this sea lion to, you know what, who won? Actually, he did. He just stood his ground, and this thing after a while sort of just gave up and wandered back into the tussock. Macquarie Island is actually administered by Tasmania. Very nice there. We were invited into the smoker room where we had tea and coffee, and they had freshly made hot scones, which was rather a special treat. Now, after leaving Macquarie Island, we sort of headed south again towards Antarctica. We had left the Roaring Forties by this stage, and we're almost at the bottom end of the Furious 50s, and we're entering the screaming or shrieking 60s. Now, the boundaries of the winds aren't arbitrary, but certainly their strength and ferocity is not, and it gets worse as you head south. Once you get below 60 degrees line of latitude, we're actually become into the Antarctic Treaty Area, which means that all the land and ice shelves south of 60 degrees, but not the seas, will become part of the Antarctic Treaty. Once we left Macquarie Island, we're on our own. If there is a problem, we have to sort it out ourselves, because there's no help available for certainly days, and if not, it could be for a week, 10 days. There is actually quite a sense of remoteness. because we're heading into an area where there is fairly rarely visited part of the planet. It's a long way to sail, and we're going to be at sea for 3 to 4 weeks, and at some stage we're going to get into some rough seas. So getting back to Antarctica is not going to be an easy ride. Now, people going to the Antarctic, only a very small portion of people actually head into the Ross Sea. Most of the Antarctic tourists go through from South America into the Antarctic Peninsula area. This area has rough weather and extremely large icebergs. Now, the year that I was there was only about 100 people, 2 expeditions of about 50 people that visited McMurdo Sound. Now, this is not a washing machine, it's the sea washing the porthole on the outside, so it's had a bit of a roll on this particular day. What's this lady looking at? We had a competition to see who would guess the time and the date when we'd see our first iceberg. No, I didn't win it, but I got second. Very special to see the first iceberg. Once we get down below 66 degrees, now that's where the Antarctic Circle is. We have a ceremony on board called the Mark of the Penguin. This is the expedition leader, Rodney Russ, reading out a quote asking us to swear to an oath that we would promote and protect the Antarctic to the best of our ability. Receiving the Mark of the Penguin, and then it was celebrated with a glass of mulled wine. We're on the bridge of the Spirit of Enderby. It was an open policy. You could go onto the bridge at any time, as long as there wasn't a pilot on board. That only occurred when we were in Bluff, and provided there was no navigational hazard or restriction of visibility. This guy with the glasses, he was regarded as one of the top Antarctic ice captains in the world. One of our fellow passengers with snow petrol, and that would be about a metre away from her shoulder. They just land on the ship anywhere, have a rest and stretch and yawn, and when they're ready they just open up and fly off again. There were several of them always hanging around the ship, and it was so special to see. It's absolutely snow white. After 3 days, we're approaching the Antarctic continent itself. This is Cape Adare. Now, in 1895, there was some Norwegian explorers by the name of Bull and Borgenchoff landed here, and they are the first documented landing of human landing on the Antarctic continent. Borchgrevink came back in 1899 and he erected 2 huts, and these were the first 2 human structures to be built in Antarctica, and they became the first expedition to ever overwinter on the Antarctic continent. It was actually a British expedition, but it was led by a Norwegian. And also on the hills there is a grave, and that became the first human grave on the Antarctic continent. These are the 2 remains of the 2 huts built by Borchgrevink. The one with the roof on has been totally restored with a grant from the Norwegian government. And the little building to the left is not actually an outhouse, it's a porch that was left by Captain Scott, one of his research parties in 1911, 1912. We couldn't land at Cape Adare, although we wanted to. There was too much ice against the shore and we couldn't get the Zodiacs through this ice. So we came out and then we sailed south towards Cape Royds. An English couple He was a lawyer, and she actually sung in the opera. We landed at a place called Black Sand Bay, and it took us about 40 minutes to walk across this part of Ross Island to get to Cape Royds and Shackleton's hut. This hut was built in 1907 for his expedition until 1909. He went from here to the pole, but he missed the pole by a mere 97 miles. It has been completely restored as well. All the special areas in the Antarctic are totally protected, and each area has its own rules and regulations which had to be adhered to. And the woman at the bottom left of your photograph, she was the New Zealand representative to make sure all the rules and regulations were adhered to. She had the final say as whether we could enter or not enter any particular specially protected area. Here, before we can enter the hut, we had to have the soles of our chutes inspected for scoria, scree, and penguin poo, etc., to make before we went inside. And inside this hut, we're only allowed 8 people at a time, plus the hut guide. Shackleton's hut, and this was completely restored between 2004 and 2008. And during the restoration, they found cases of whiskey under the floor. And if you want some good history on this and what happens with the Antarctic Treaty, Neville Peate's book, Shackleton's Whiskey, is certainly a well worth reading. They just can't take the whiskey in whatever way. It all had to be approved by the Antarctic Treaty partners, and then that one bottle was taken back to England, sampled, and then returned. This is the inside of the hut. Imagine that's all the heating and the cooking that they had was that stove. So at the best in midwinter, it's going to be close to freezing, if not well below. This is the Antarctic specially protected area around this little lake called Pony Lake, and was named by Shackleton as Pony Lake because he had ponies which he wintered over in that area. These are the last of the Adelie penguins. They are still finishing molting, and there's a few young chicks still to finish fledging. A lot of that sort of small white stuff you see amongst the scoria is actually feathers from the molting penguins. This is the wild man of our expedition. He wore shorts that day. I don't know how he did it. It was extremely cold, but he never wore them after this day. He always wore long trousers after that. Black Sand Bay, and it's understandable when you think about it why it's black, because the whole of Ross Island is volcanic. It was made by volcanoes. There are 3 of them: Mount Bird, Mount Terror, and Mount Terra Nova. They're the extinct volcanoes, with Mount Erebus, and that's considered the southernmost active volcano on Earth. Adelie penguin. And then we went down to Cape Evans. It's only about 14 nautical miles south from Cape Royds. Now this area here was discovered by Scott in his 1901-1903 expedition, and he named it the Skuary because the large number of skuas that were there. And it came back here in 1910-13, and he built another hut here, naming it Cape Evans after Lieutenant Evans, who was the second in command of his expedition. And that ice tongue in the background is part of the Barne Glacier. Now it's perhaps time to explain why I have an interest in the Antarctica. It was this man that started it all, Robert Falcon Scott, and the ship, the SY steam yacht Terra Nova. And aboard this ship was this man, photographed in May 1910, 7 months later, and again in 1982. Well, who was he? He was Bill Burton, Scott's last man, my grandfather, and he fortunately passed away just 7 weeks before his 100th birthday. Now, it was important for me to go down there, not to do it as I've been there, done that, nor did I want it to be on a bucket list. But circumstances and events all fell together to make this expedition happen. I'm so grateful to so many people for helping me to achieve what was a magnificent experience. Now, I was at Cape Evans, I was able to see and experience what I'd heard over many decades, and I wanted to experience the history as well. I'd heard from my grandfather over a lifetime, things that he did on the expedition, he saw and experienced, and now I was able to see it for myself and experience what it would have been like in his day as to the comfort we had when I did it. At the very best, his food going down the Terra Nova in 1910, or over the years, 1910 to 13, would have been adequate, whereas we were well fed and well catered for. It was special. And while I specifically went down for the history, we couldn't help but getting blown away with the scenery and especially the wildlife. They were just living in their own natural environment. Scott's hut looking across to the Transantarctic Mountains. Now that's not a hot skip in the railway, that's over 70 miles. It's a long way distances in the Antarctic because the air is so clear, makes them shorter. Scott's hut again. It's special because once they got all the provisions off the ship, it was all hands to get this hut built. And wandering around, it made me wonder to find out, which bit of timber did my grandfather hold, or which nail did he put in? What else did he do to help with building this hut? And it was a very special and emotional time inside the hut, as it was then and as it is now. It was uncanny walking into the hut because you almost felt as if you turned around, you're going to see them come back and ask what the hell you were doing in the hut. It was almost felt as if you were invading their privacy. And the galley, as it was, we saw it, and here's Clissard, the cook on this expedition, preparing meals for those who overwintered. It's basically left as they best remember it of 100 years ago. This is the main room. They called it for the afterguard, and that's for the officers and scientists. Unlike Shackleton, who tended to mix with all his men, Scott had a demarcation line where the officers and the scientists were one part of the hut, all the lower ranks messed and occupied the other area. And basically there was very little, if any, mixing between the two hierarchies. In 1963, the grandfather was invited with these other two gentlemen. They're both Terra Nova veterans, to a trip down south, and here they are in Scott's hut, Cape Evans, 1963. And in 19 76, 77, my uncle, he went down as one of the first caretakers for Scott's hut at Cape Evans. And there's myself in the hut in 2014. So that made me the third generation of my family to enter this hut. I didn't realise it wasn't until one of the passengers pointed out to me that I was the third generation that hadn't entered my head. From there we sort of sailed away. Fantastic opportunity to see what the ice and the wind-blown stuff can do to timber. This is the anchor of the Aurora. This is one of the relief ships for Shackleton's 1914-16 expedition, but that's quite a story itself. There's a monument to the three men that the relief party for Shackleton who lost their lives here. Arnold Smith, Arrhenius McIntosh and Victor Hayward. This is the emperor penguin. It's the granddaddy of them all. It grows to well over a metre, weighs up to 40 kilograms. We didn't see many of them because the main breeding season had finished and the ice had gone out. They tend to want to be on the ice more so than on land. Sailed away from Cape Evans. It was, to me, quite an emotional time to go away and to suddenly have realised that all the things I've seen and heard of Cape Evans and the expedition over a lifetime. I've been there, seen it and experienced it, and I don't mind admitting it was quite emotional. You all know what this is, and this is Mount Erebus. As the ice was out, we were able to sail slightly south of Ross Island and come and land at Scott Base from below Scott Base. So we're actually looking north at Scott Base. And though the water was very cold, Rodney was wearing a special pair of insulated waders. He used that to help us ashore. Scott Base. Now, there's 3 wind turbines on the hill there. Those of you with the sharp eyes will see that. Now, that generates virtually all the power for Scott Base. They do have backup generators, and then they can sell the surplus power to the Americans in McMurdo, which is just over the hill. Scott Base, 77.51 degrees south. That's as far south as we could go. Still a long way from anywhere. Imagine having to pull from this spot here a sledge for 1,353 kilometres in each direction. It's a long, long way. Makes you wonder how tough they are and perhaps how soft we've become today. The top of Observation Hill, looking down at McMurdo, and it was called Observation Hill because that's where they used to climb to look out over the Ross ice shelf to see if any of the sledging parties were returning. Here we are walking to Scott's Discovery Hut, 1901, 1903. Perhaps you could say we're just as bad as the penguins who can't read. The Church of the Snows. And these are the flags of the incumbent Antarctic Treaty Nations and the bust of Admiral Byrd. Yes, McMurdo has all the social side of life there, including this coffee. And the smoking sign within 25 litres is actually quite genuine, because one of the biggest fears they have is of fire. All rubbish is recycled and taken back to a disposal. Here they're all bundled up in these crates and then they're loaded onto ships and taken back to the States for recycling or disposal. All the rubbish from New Zealand Scott's base is also bundled up and brought back to New Zealand for disposal. So the days of just sort of saying, oh, nature takes care of itself are gone. It's all total recycling in its literal form. Hut Point is just at the the northern end of McMurdo Sound. This is in 1902. Now, if you ever go enter a quiz show and they ask you for the southernmost Queenslander house in the world, if you entered Hut Point, Antarctica, on Ross Island, you'd be bang on. It was picked up in Sydney on the way out in 1900, 1901. It wasn't a particularly good hut, it wasn't well insulated, and they certainly didn't like, the men didn't like the hut anyway. Excuse me, I was going to get a drink of water. And this is a monument to George, excuse me, George Vince. Thank you. And he lost his life in 1902 by returning to the Discovery. It was very, very cold this day. It was -12 air temperature and 34 degrees of wind chill. It was so cold that a lot of the cameras froze and the shuttle refused to work. Orcas, when they get a bit of speed on, we were cruising at about 12 knots. They made us look as if we were standing still. You couldn't tell whether it was midnight or midday. The sun was still above the horizon all day. We headed round the coast of Ross Island and came to the Ross Ice Shelf. This ice shelf is massive. You could drop France on it and still have room over. So from where we started here, it'd be another 800 kilometres to get to the other side of the Ross Ice Shelf. That is on the eastern side of Ross Island, Cape Crozier. And if you want another good read, there's a book by Apsley Cherry Gerard, The Worst Journey in the World. They came and visited this place midwinter 1911. Fantastic scenery. And it's level like that for about 800 miles inland. From the Ross Ice Shelf, we sort of headed sort of northwest towards a place called Terra Nova Bay. On the way across, we run into one of these katabatic winds. It's showing you where we were from the Ross Ice Shelf, heading across to Terra Nova Bay. In Terra Nova Bay, there are 3 research stations. One is of the Italians. There's also a South Korean and a German research station there as well. And this is a katabatic wind, where it wasn't a really severe one, but it certainly whipped up the sea in next to no time. And as a result, we were asked to leave the bridge because everything had completely frozen up. All the spray had frozen solid on the windows, and that's all I could navigate through was that little hole there. And this is where you, thank goodness that you're a passenger and not a seaman. We had to clean all the windows, de-ice them. And of course, they take this ice build-up on the ship very seriously because the spray was quite high up on the ship, and it affects the stability of the ship in rough weather. So they go around with these mauls, seamen, and they bash the ice off all the extremities. And this here was, a skating ring was actually easier to walk on than that. It was extremely slippery. But it even covered the ice of the side of the ship. We went ashore at the Italian base that had been closed for the season as a summer-only base. Now, this was the only time we actually set foot on the Antarctic continent. Remember, Ross Island is just that, it's just an island, and it's only connected to the mainland via these ice shelves, the Ross Ice Shelf. An English gentleman posing. Not a geologist, but the rock formations around this area were quite special. From there we are, sailing was generally always north, heading back towards New Zealand. As at the very end of summer, every time the sea got calm, we started to get all the effects of this pancake ice. Alone a dally amongst the ice. And as the sea starts to freeze, it forces the phytoplankton from the water, and it causes this snowy smudge. And here we sailed further north to a place called Cape Hallett. This is where we've got into some pretty big ice here. The ship handled it without too trouble. We run into one flow that had actually stalled the ship until the power on the ship just quietly pushed it ultimately out of the way. There was an American base here, or combined New Zealand American base, until about the mid-1960s, and then it had a fire, and after that it was a summer-only base, and it was finally abandoned. In 1973, everything's been totally removed, and you wouldn't even know there was a base there. We were hoping to do a Zodiac cruise here, but the captain was very concerned that the ice was freezing, and he didn't want to stop the ship, because the last thing he wanted was to spend the winter there, and none of us did either. And as we turned round, we saw Football Hill, obviously its name. But inland from here, there are three other mountains. The highest one at 2,740 metres is named Mount Burton. It's named after my grandfather. And there are two other peaks there, Mount McCarthy and Mount McDonald. And they're also named after those three Terra Nova veterans that lived there most of their lives in Christchurch. And I was asked to do a presentation on my grandfather. We had a lecture room on the ship. Very special time to be able to talk about my grandfather. We then sailed north to the Bellini Islands. They're just old volcanic islands. It's virtually snow covered. There's some of the smaller ones. There are quite three larger islands. You couldn't go very close to the edge here because the cornices of the ice coming off the hills, are just every now and again you'd hear an avalanche of ice roaring down those steep faces. This is another penguin, chin strap. Some of the icebergs, as they get further north, they change their shape and they become very attractive and gives a fantastic light. When the sea light, sunlight is reflected through them. Humpback whale. It sort of makes you realise that how amazing it is to see wildlife in their own natural environment and how they can live and survive in such extreme conditions. Snow petrel. It's one of the giant petrels. Another magnificently sculptured remains of an iceberg. From there we had 4 days sailing to Campbell Island. 900 nautical miles, we sailed all day, every day. And the sea we were going over was up to 6 kilometres deep. Extremely deep seas. We had a party one night, the Pea Party, and here's one of these expedition staff drinking the hard stuff, thinking thinking he was a penguin. And the gentleman on the right, his father was the mate on the Aurora, which was Shackleton's relief ship for the Ross Sea in 1914, 1916. So there were 2 people on board, myself and this gentleman who had relations who were directly connected to the Antarctic, in the Ross Sea in particular. The gentleman serving as the expedition doctor from the UK. As it turned out, we were well endowed with medical professionals. We had a surgeon's neurology professor and many other specialists. I think it was about 8 or 9 medical specialists, and one passenger remarked, the only thing we probably couldn't do on the ship here is a brain transplant. There's expertise in almost every other field. Campbell Island. This was discovered in 1810 by a chap called Hasselborough, and he was on the sealing ship, the brig. This is the inlet here, or the bay, the harbour is named Perseverance Harbour. And he drowned here, that's Hasselborough, in 1810, rather an unfortunate end for him. Perseverance Harbour, and this is the southernmost of New Zealand's subantarctic islands, 700 kilometres south of Bluff. It became a seal hunting base, and seal population was almost totally eradicated. Now, it's interesting to note that Campbell Island rains on average 325 days per year. We had 2 fine blue days. One of the Russian crew had been on expedition south here, and it's the first time he said he'd seen blue sky at Campbell Island after 32 visits. Now, the buildings on the right are what was left of the meteorological station in the mid-1990s. That was automated. The buildings are still there. The responsibility of DOC, but unfortunately have no money to maintain them, so it's just slowly falling into ruin. And this is the southernmost tree in the world, the loneliest tree in the world. It was planted sometime between 1901 and 1907 by Lord Ranfurly, who was then Governor General of New Zealand. Now, its unusual shape is because meteorological staff used to cut a branch off it for their Christmas tree each year. Campbell Island was actually farmed right through up until about 1931. Even the Shetland Islands were asked to come out here to work, and it was even too tough for them. So all the last of the stock were removed in 1991, and it was declared pest-free in 2006. There's a couple of posts still standing of the old fence line. This is starting a walk across to Northwest Bay on the other side of Campbell Island. Slowly making our way across the island. So long legs are needed at times. And you can see why the western side of virtually all these sub-Antarctic islands are so treacherous for any unfortunate ship that managed to, well, unfortunately run into them. And several years ago, there was a TV program, two guys, Jamie and Kevin, they reenacted two of the shipwrecks on the Auckland Islands. Northwest Bay Hut. In 1992, there was a staff from the Met Station were snorkeling here, and one of them was attacked by a shark. After a bit of a drama, they got him back to the main base, and a helicopter came from New Zealand. And at that stage, it was the longest helicopter flight, rescue flight in the world. He did survive. The Emperor Daisy. Campbell Island cormorant. And the Campbell Island teal. When they poisoned the Campbell Island, they thought they'd made this bird extinct, but it was found on an offshore island and reintroduced to Campbell Island. And in the absence of predators, it is now thriving. A very secretive bird, though. Yellow-eyed penguins. If they wanted to cross on the boardwalk and we happened to be there, they just hopped on the boardwalk, we stopped, let them go, they hopped off, we carried on, and so did they. Recognise that little fella. It's a pipit. Just a wee bit smaller than a sparrow, but very friendly. There's nothing for you to stop and look down and you find one sitting on your boot. Campbell Island snipe. Feature of perhaps Campbell Island is that it's considered the albatross capital of the world. Now these birds are massive. The wingspan is 3 metres. So you pace out 3 metres. That's absolutely huge. When you're walking across the island and these birds come over, it just sounds like a glider whistling as they fly overhead. These are juvenile albatrosses gamming, and this is the equivalent of sort of having teenagers having a dry get together. These birds still have not bred. These are adults nesting with chicks on the nest, and one stayed with the chick, the other one went away feeding. came back, and we were very lucky to happen to see this adult feeding its chick. We just heard a bit of a gnash of beaks. This bird stood up, the chick came out, it was fed, and then it just wandered back underneath its mum or its dad and just waited till the next feeding time. We were only about 10, 12 metres away. It didn't seem to be concerned about our presence in the least. And there's still the odd gentleman amongst us. Looking down into Northwest Bay, just a wee bit of fog came through towards the end of the second day. Very magnificent experience on Campbell Island, it really was. On the top of Mount Honey, the highest point on Campbell Island. And this slide concludes our expedition to the Antarctic. For me, it was literally an experience of a lifetime. And it brings back so many happy and wonderful, memorable memories, re-showing me all these tonight. And I trust that you came and enjoyed and shared with me this expedition as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. Fantastic. I'm sure that I wasn't the only one who was saying, wow, gee, that's beautiful to myself here watching that. Now, if you are able to stop sharing your screen, Robin, just at the bottom, yep, there we go. It is after 8 o'clock, so if you do need to go, feel free to just leave the meeting, and you can do that just in the bottom right. There's a little red button that says leave. But if you do have any questions, Robin's available perhaps for a few more minutes. If anyone's got any questions for Robin, feel free to either type them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask away.
I was going to ask what the big thistly plant was. I don't know if you knew what that one was. It was a big, looked like a giant thistle.
There's the Campbell Island daisy, and there's also the quarry cabbage. So both mega herbs. Now, there was about 3 or 4 photos that were shown there of all scenes that you've all seen before.
Yeah.
And you've all seen them on your $5 note, because there's one side that's got the scene of Campbell Island, Perseverance Harbour. It's got the yellow-eyed penguin. It's got the Bulbina rossii, that's the little wee yellow poker-type flower, and it's also got the Campbell Island daisy. So next time you get the $5 note out, remember your visit to Stewart Island, Campbell Island was on that note.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that question and your answer, Robin. Just in the chat, we've got a question. Mary says, thank you, and that's as near as I'll ever be. How often do the trips go south?
Every year there's 2 trips that go south from Bluff. This coming year, I think there's going to be 3. Sometimes there's an expedition that goes from Bluff and it goes to the Australian bases across at Davis and Commonwealth Bay. But normally there's 2. Since 2014, there's been 2 expeditions a year that have gone into McMurdo Sound. So that's roughly around the maximum of 100 passengers. And you're limited to that because of the size of the ship initially. And secondly, you're only allowed so many people ashore at any one time. The Campbell Island, you're only allowed 50 people ashore at one time. So if you're having a ship that's going there with 200 passengers, there's 150 got to stay on board until those other 50 come back off. And it's done deliberately to try and keep the island pristine and as natural as possible without the overspoiling by too many visitors.
That makes sense. So is it in our summertime, I presume, that you go?
Yes, the first expedition down to the Ross Sea, it leaves early January, gets back early February, and the second one goes in early February, and then it gets back in early March. But quite often they'll do 2 expeditions prior to Christmas to the sub-Antarctic islands only. That's to do the Snares, Auckland, Macquarie, Campbell, and some of them will actually do the Antipodes and the Bounty Islands as well.
Anyone got any other questions for Robin? Now's your chance to ask.
I did
No?
think of something I was watching, but I can't remember them now. I should have written a bit of paper, sorry. That was really interesting. Thank you so much. It was really enjoyable.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like we've got anyone jumping up to ask any questions, so we might round it out there. Robin, thank you very much for an excellent presentation, and as Mari said in the chat, absolutely brilliant photography from the people that were on board, yourself and others. So that was great to be able to see that those photos and hear your presentation. It was thoroughly enjoyable. So thank you very much.
Thank you, it was my pleasure, really was.